of the refugee crisis, a pending problem that does just affect the African continent, but the global world at large. And of course, we shall be diving just to reiterate that less than 1% of the total refugee population were offered a resettlement, according to data from the Institute for Security Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, that will constitute today's menu on Talking Point this day. Thank you for joining us. Do stay with us. Hello, Africa and the world. Thank you, Mansley, for taking the rendezvous via your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. This day, like we mentioned in our preamble, we shall be discussing Africa's refugee crisis, a problem that is pending on the African continent and, of course, affecting the globe at large. And we're asking the question, while the global neglect, of course, before we dive right into analyzing or discussing today's topic of discussion, ladies and gentlemen, we shall welcome our guest of today. And our panel, we shall be taking you first to the United States of America to be joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist and doubles as an economist. Thank you immensely, sir, for honoring today's invitation.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. I hope we have a fruitful conversation, and thank my co-panelists for joining the panel as well.
It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. We are equally been joined by Chief MUSI, WAAMUWURE, who is joining us all the way here from Cameroon. He is a Pan-Africanist. Thank you immensely, Chief MUSI, for taking the rendezvous.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you very much for always having us on the show. And my regards to Dr. FONGOD for always being there. We're looking forward to a very fruitful conversation.
It's always a pleasure, Your Majesty. Ladies and gentlemen, as you settle in, just to mention that you're watching us on 4U Television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3 4U Radio Africa. And of course, we are streaming on our social media platforms, that is YouTube and Facebook. Before we proceed this day on the topic on the menu this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing the refugee crisis, like we mentioned, regional as well as a global problem. And this is caused, according to experts, political violence, insecurity. We have conflicts. We equally have climate change as amid other factors. Now, to dive right in this discussion this day with you, Chief MUSI, when you listen to a preamble and, of course, when you assess the current problem that is affecting the region, that is the African continent and the globe at large, how would you say, why is this refugee crisis escalating on the African continent?
Thank you, Sharon. What I would say on this topic is that it's a continuous phenomenon in Africa where we continuously see people migrating to different regions, migrating to different countries. Most probably, as you would know, when we talk of refugees, it means there are people who are seeking better livelihood, seeking for new residence, seeking for new statehood, and people who are moving away from crisis situations in their different countries of origin. I would think that the situation is alarming in Africa in particular, which I want to lay more emphasis before looking at the global perspective, in the sense that if you would bear with me, we've had this conversation on the show severally, where we accept that in Africa there are lots and lots of crises around the African continent, especially at the level of political crisis, at the level of mostly political crisis. And if you look at the case of Cameroon, which is a socio-political issue, the Anglophone crisis, and then this tells you that if globally Africa faces one of the worst challenges of migration or refugee or people migrating to different countries. So this topic today, it's something that we will look at it globally, because if you talk to maybe 1,000 refugees, 900 of them will tell you the same problem. They are moving for better livelihood. And then they would always have a story to tell you. It might be its reality on the ground or just the fact that they want a better lifestyle, a better livelihood. And I think this is really a call for concern. But it has been taking a gradual drift to the West, where you see countries like Ukraine, the Russian-Ukraine war. It's plagued lots of people, where we have seen thousands and thousands of people move out of Ukraine because of the worrying situation. If you even look at what is happening also in the Gaza Strip, it will tell you most people are seeking better livelihood. But as a Pan-Africanist, I think I want to contextualize my better understanding of these immigrants moving to different countries, because Africa has over the years been plagued with lots and lots of political issues. And I think in the course of this program, we'll look and maybe examine a few of these countries, some of these nations that are plagued with this refugee situation, and see how we can draw a line. And of course, look at how this can be made better. But in a nutshell, it's people moving and looking for better livelihood.
Absolutely. It's all about trying to find better places from where they find, or better from their homes. Thank you immensely, Chief MUSI, for that brilliant introduction. Now I'm going to proceed with you, Dr. FONGOD. You listened to your co-panelist, and he went ahead to cite why we have this problem on the African continent. Just to reiterate that we have countries in Africa, like we mentioned in our preamble, like the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Chad that needs, or still has to face the repercussions of people moving from their different homes due to conflict and finding solace in these respective countries. We equally have countries like Ethiopia and a host of others. Now, in your opinion, as an expert, why would you say this refugee crisis keeps deteriorating over time as far as the African continent is concerned?
Well, I think we need to look carefully as to why is it that this crisis, people are moving or migrating in the first place. I think that on top of that chart will be conflict, violence in wars that are so much plagued the African continent. And if you look at the area on the African continent where there is this mass migration, if we look at places like Sudan, the DRC, especially around the Goma area, you will realize that these are areas that are heavy with conflicts. And so we are looking at a continent that is plagued with a lot of violence, political instability. There's obviously economic hardship. There are issues of environmental factors, but that is not as prevalent as what we have so far as, issues that pertains to war and conflicts. So we have to find a way to be able to address that particular issue on the African continent. We have to find ways to speak to stakeholders, people who are involved in making decisions that impacts others' lives. If you're looking at a country like Cameroon, for example, I think my co-panelist was speaking on the issues of the Anglophone, Francophone issue. We've had a lot of people who have moved out of these regions, hot regions in relationship to its violence, into, more cooler, safer areas, which unlikely is actually either in Nigeria or, in some other parts of Cameroon. There's been that mass migration. The idea is this, that we have to find ways in which, if we're going to successfully curb what is happening, then we need to be able to address these issues of conflict. Why are we fighting? Why is it necessary for us to fight? Why is it that we can no longer come to the table and discuss as brothers? Why is it that we are no longer looking at ourselves as countrymen, and most importantly, as Africans? And to me, we really need to be able to address that particular issue, because conflict is literally driving the mass migration that we see on the continent of Africa. And then, obviously, on the economic front, there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that needs to be said, but we have to, first of all, address the issues of conflict.
Speaking of addressing the issues of conflict, given it is one of the top issues why we keep having these issues of the refugee crisis on the African continent, that leads me to my next question to you, Chief MUSI. Now, what accounts for this increased conflict? We have discussed this countless times in the course of the program, but in a bid to elucidate our audience and clarify certain things, what accounts for this increased conflict which we keep seeing on a daily basis on the African continent?
Sharon, let me take a simple within an African perspective. If you look at our leaders, our African leaders, like FONGOD said, they are mostly at the forefront of most of this crisis. And at the end of the day, the person who suffers most is the civilian. It's the normal person on the streets. They are the ones who suffer most from this conflict. And when you want to look at the reason for this conflict, it's one, there is poor standard of living. People are living relatively below the belt. You will take a country like Cameroon where people are living under less than $1 a day. Like it's a basic, a normal person lives with relatively less than $1. That's less than 500 francs CFA. You would take a situation where there is deteriorating health facilities. Our health facilities, we have very, very poor health facilities whereby the masses are not able to get adequate health care. And then you look at also the political environment is not stable, whereby those who are in power, they rig elections to their favor, and the opposition keeps going on over and over the years and over the years. These are some of the things that really plague the people to get angry, and then we burst into conflict, and we burst into some of these crises. And then another aspect is, I have always talked about this aspect, that the day our leaders will understand that if medical facilities are good in their country, if educational facilities are good in their countries, if the laws of that country are being respected, and basic hygiene, good road infrastructures, when all these basic facilities are provided for the normal citizens, for the civilians, it is but normal that they would live a better life. They would find no interest in wanting to look at what politicians or the rulers are doing, because they are having the basic human necessities and the things that they need to live a better life. So these conflicts start coming once people start finding it very difficult to get these facilities, to fend for them, to pay their medical bills, and when they even find it so difficult for elected officials to respect the laws governing their country. These are some of the basic things that have pushed most of our African countries into conflict. And at the end of the day, what happens? People start migrating when there is war. And when there is war, people start moving. And when there is hardship, people start moving. And now we plunge our countries, we plunge our nations into some of these devastating situations. And I think when the day our leaders, the day the politicians will start reasoning and understanding that these civilians need these basic things for them to create a leverage for better politics and better livelihood, the day we Africans will come out of this dilemma. The issue is we have been crying, we have been saying these things over and over on the media, and I still think that the politicians are still living in that their dream world and making the country get into total quagmire.
Thank you immensely, Chief MUSI. Just to highlight that we shall be coming to this point where the African continent will be able to stand for itself, and that is in line with a recent project that was launched on Thursday by the United Nations Development Program, in line with I Am Sahel, which is in the bid to amplify some of the resources Africa has for it to be able to tackle some of these challenges and overcome these challenges like the refugee crisis, which we discussed in the course of today's program. So, Dr. FONGOD, taking into consideration this recent problem, which is not really recent but has been recurrent on the African continent, when you look at the global neglect which we have, what accounts for this decision, would not say decision, but a slight decision by the international community not to really address this issue of the refugee crisis, because the United Nations Human Rights Commission highlighted that it's a global problem, and we have about 37% that is from the African continent. So if we're looking at a region like the Sahelian region, where we have numerous conflicts and we have climate change in other parts of Africa, but yet this problem is yet to be addressed and is left to just the African people. Do you think that given the African continent a voice at the international scene will address this problem?
Well, I think that the question is whose problem it is. It's Africa's problem.
Absolutely.
It is our problem. We need to basically emancipate ourselves from this ideology that somewhat we always have to look for the West for whatever is wrong with the continent of Africa. We are our own first problem. What we need on the continent of Africa is not foreign aid. What we need on the continent of Africa is not somebody showing up to tell us what to do. What we need on the continent of Africa is something everybody has at their home, is a mirror. Take a look at the mirror and look at what you're seeing. You see a reflection of your reality. That's who you are. And I think that as long as we keep looking somewhere else, we'll find ourselves in this quagmire. The West and the world will not come to Africa because, frankly speaking, whatever happens on the African continent is not doing one measured thing that can literally disrupt world economy, and that is to make sure that the global supply chain, all right, stays intact. Unfortunately, we are not manufacturing anything. Unfortunately, there's really nothing we're doing on the African continent that can be able to basically disrupt the world supply chain. So when we talk about the world supply chain, we're talking about China. We're talking about, basically China that supplies everything to everybody else, and how we can be able to get goods and services, through the Mediterranean and, the Atlantic, so they can get to the Americas. Once America is breathing, once Europe is breathing, once everything is out there good in the West, the world is healthy. Unfortunately, that's not your reality as Africans. And that's not our reality for folks who live in the Sahel, for those in Goma, for those on the horns of Africa. We have to be able to find ways in which we address the issues on the continent of Africa with an Afrocentric mindset. Let Africans literally take care of whatever it is that they need to take care of, rather than waiting for a group like the United Nations to talk about whatever they want to do on the African continent. That is some kind of a fifth-generation warfare. I don't think you really understand exactly how deep this is. Let me just say this, to throw in as a little caveat. The fifth-generation warfare is when we use basically psychological warfare to create environments, destabilize government without firing a single gun. The CIA began this with the Arab Spring, all right? If you look at the whole whatever happened during the Arab Spring, the U.S. military fired no single bullet, no guns, there were no guys on the ground, but they just ginger up the population with misinformation, all right, and then create a narrative on the social media platforms, which basically the people were told what to do, how to do it, and then, they were able to topple governments. Look at what is happening in places like Kenya. So we have to be able to understand that we're dealing with the very complex geopolitical structures so far as the world is concerned, where technology is evolving, and this is not a recent idea, this is quite ancient. So while we're talking about displaced people, while we're talking about how we can be able to fight what is happening, we need to be able to come together and understand that while we are fighting internal issues, we are also fighting external issues. There are external issues, there are external threats that is happening, to us as a people, and then we have those that is happening from within. We need to be able to address those from within. There is an old African adage that says, if there are no enemy within, then the enemy without would do us no harm. If there are no enemies within, then the enemies without, they will do us no harm. That means anyone who is coming from the outside to be able to rain havoc on the continent of Africa does not have the capacity to succeed if there are no enemies within, because we need internal enemies to be able to facilitate and create conducive environment for external enemies to be able to attack. True, we have issues on the African continent when it comes to refugees. true. We understand that we are, embroiled in all kinds of fighting and conflicts, okay, across ethnic lines, and we are dealing with all kinds of geopolitical issues on the continent. We have all kinds of political stalemate that has brought us to where we are, but fundamentally, we have to find a way in which we pull together and bring an end to this, because the only person who suffers is the African. And if we have a mindset that says Africa first, then we will be able to make sure we do whatever it takes to put an end to the bloodshed on the continent of Africa. And finding ways in which we can address that will also help stop the spread, of people moving. If people have to move, let them move because it's of free will. If we have to create environments where there are cross-border trade, all right, either for services and goods, then that's great. Let people move. If we have to create environment where people can actually be able to get jobs and be hired in different sectors, in different countries without having to go through all kinds of laborious processes of getting work permits and whatnot on the African continent, then that is good. But we cannot create an environment that is so toxic where we have people who do not have the capacity to be able to do just the basic things in their communities that they need to do. And this is a little, piece of advice for the mighty and the great among us. I'm talking about the political elite. If you look across the continent of Africa, nobody is safe. Nobody is safe. And anybody can be toppled any day. So we have to be able to make sure that if we are representing the people, which is the mandate and what the democracy actually stands for, if it is the power of the people, if we are representing the people, then let us make sure that the people become the reason to which we govern, not some foreign entity that promises to be in power at the expense of our own people.
Absolutely, Dr. FONGOD. I'll be staying with you. You mentioned that you're one of those advocates that stand for African solutions to African problems. Now, you said that if we have this refugee crisis continuing on the African continent is because we have this persistent rise in conflicts. Now, as an expert, a Pan-Africanist, how can the African people address this problem? How can they amplify what they have to be able to quell or finally put a stop to this rising crisis?
We can be able to make sure that we start dealing with some things that we already have. Number one, we need to be able to convert what we have as raw materials on the African continent and basically develop that into finished products. I keep giving an example of a location in America, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's called Hershey. There's a small city outside of the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That place is called Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hershey, Pennsylvania produces this chocolate called a Hershey chocolate. The GDP of that small area, not up to the size of Bonaberry in Douala, all right? The GDP per capita is bigger than that of the whole entire Ivory Coast per capita, and yet Ivory Coast is producing 33% of all of the world's cocoa, all right? One country, Ivory Coast, 33% of the world's cocoa, but her GDP per capita has nothing to do with the small, tiny city, all right, outside of the capital of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, all right, just a small city outside of the capital. Why? Because all they do is produce chocolate and all its related products. There are no cocoa farms in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There are no cocoa farms in Hershey, Pennsylvania. There are none. There are no cocoa farms in the United States. But then all that they do is collect raw materials, transform them, and then ship them back in the world. So we enjoy Hershey chocolate in Cameroon. We enjoy that in Ivory Coast. We enjoy that in Ghana. We enjoy that everywhere that cocoa is being farmed. But unfortunately, we are not converting our own cocoa products into somewhat finished products. And that is where we need to start. Number one, we need to make sure that we depend on what is manufactured on the continent of Africa. We give first priority of products that are manufactured on the continent rather than importing products from outside. Number two, we have to have some kind of a regional trade agreement that will facilitate that if there are refugees, the host countries can be able to help build up some kind of a regional economy where those people who have been, who have moved as a result of, the crisis can be hired, to work in those countries that they have been displaced to. And then their skills and their services can actually be used as well. And that will boost up the economy and that will grow the economy overall. We cannot just get people, human capital, put them in some kind of a refugee camp and then somewhat think that we're doing God's work. Number one, it really does not work. We have to find a way in which we get these people to keep working. And this is, primarily what, groups like the United Nations will do. They quarantine people in camps and raise billions of US dollars, to which it is that the people who have been quarantined are being fed, corned beef and rice and God knows what. Allow people to basically explore and expand and be able to become useful with their God's given talents and the abilities that they have acquired through their life story. So it's important for us to be able to address this. And this is where we come as we begin to be able to integrate us on the African continent with what we have, use what is in our hands rather than depending on what is coming from outside. We have the solution, we have the skill sets, we have the technology, we have the know-how. All that we need is the will.
Absolutely, it's all about the willpower. Now to you, Chief MUSI, do you share the same opinion as your co-panelists that Africa can leverage actually what it has, its own resources, to be able to tackle this issue of its own refugee crisis?
Well, I will just follow in the lines of Dr. FONGOD. He said quite a lot, and I think I will just add more to that. But I mean, that's exactly the way forward for us Africans to come out of this. I got so touched when he talked about people being quarantined in refugee, refugee centers in the name of people moving for better life and then sending them refugee aid and stuff. And at the end of the day, these people spend years upon years. That's human capital, like Dr. FONGOD said. So we really have to deviate a bit. And what is happening in countries like, Burkina Faso, you can see what Traore is doing to bring back that country to life. You can see the kind of mechanical development that's going on. You can see the kind of development in medical field, road infrastructure, health, and all of these sectors is developing Burkina Faso. And I'm sure those who were in Burkina Faso 2 years ago, if they visit Burkina Faso, they will see the kind of improvement that Traore has brought to that country. And I'm trying to say here that African politicians can deviate a little bit away from how they play the politics and try to start converting these political gains, converting this accumulated wealth that they accumulate to funding or liaising with other countries to see how they can create intercontinental trade within Africa, so that we start having people moving to other countries because they want to get there and have better opportunities of work, not running from crisis or running from issues from their own country. There are skills, they can go somewhere to study just because they want to come back and make things better in their own country. So we want to see an Africa in the future, in the nearest future, where our leaders create better inter-country or intercontinental or inter-regional blocks where we can start building our own resources and using these raw materials that we have across Africa to set up industries, to set up factories where we can reproduce, we can manufacture these raw materials that we have in Africa. Africa is such a rich continent, and I think when I see the images that we see on television, the images we see on the internet, where people are moving from Tunisia, going across the Mediterranean and looking for better livelihood in Europe, I asked myself this question: what is all this? And you hear the kind of amount of money that these people pay to get into boats, going across high seas because they want to look for a better life. I think if our African rulers, if our leaders are opening their eyes and seeing what is happening, look at what is happening in the DRC. That's one of the highest world heat crisis zones or crisis regions in the world. what are the West doing? And I think everybody is turning a blind eye from Africa because they think they want Africa to remain impoverished so that they can always come into Africa and reap our raw material. And of course, like FONGOD said in Pennsylvania, that they are producing this chocolate to bring it back to us. Meanwhile, cocoa is being produced in Africa. I mean, he said a lot of things that our leaders, if they're watching and listening to this program, they have to start having a rethink and making and creating better life standards for our people. I don't even know what it takes for our governments to live within the standards of how it's been done in the West. Let me take the US, where FONGOD is. He will testify with us that people have social security benefits, people have loan facilities there. They can take money, invest in different projects within their governments, and pay back this loan over time. What is happening in Africa? Look at the money that our leaders are spending for their security. They are spending for their travels. They are spending for their salaries. I was shocked when I watched a video the other day of the salaries of African heads of states. I mean, this, if you have a breakdown from then and go right down to the normal director in an office in Africa, you will realize that we are wasting a lot of resources where people get money for work they don't do. Meanwhile, the people who work in the farms, who are the laborers, are the ones putting in the energy, the mechanical energy, to produce the food that these bourgeoisies, these people sit in their big offices, stay in mansions and eat, buy the food, eat. But the real people who are suffering, but the farmer who is suffering to produce this food is not receiving any reciprocal gains. So I am thinking that this is the right time, if we're talking on this the subject, to cut down on this illegal immigration. I think it is high time that we, our African leaders, start sitting up and looking at setting better lifestyle standards for their citizens. By so doing, we'll be paving a better way for an Africa, for an emerging Africa. This has always been our cry. And again, look at even what happens. We cannot only talk about the fact that these refugees are moving without also looking at the impact that it also poses to the countries where they move to. Some, for some reason, will look at easy route to get to a country for greener pastures. Some have their monies to go through different routes which are expensive, but most of the time people will look at the easier routes. And when they look at the easier routes, the countries cannot accommodate a certain number of refugees. And at the end of the day, these people are being sent back to their countries of origin. And what are we talking about? All money lost, time lost, life, and the risk involved in these trips. So I think while we are talking to government, the normal person on the street, like the civilians, the people who are listening to us, who are encouraging their families to move for greener pastures without having, without following the right procedure in acquiring visas to travel to this country, should start advising their families that it is out of place for you to take $1,000, for you to take $2,000 and set on a road trip which you don't know the future, or which you don't know where you're heading to, or which you don't even know the outcome of where you're going to and what will happen. And we keep seeing what is happening to other people who have embarked on these journeys. So I think we are calling on Africans, the young ones, the youth in particular, that there is still hope. Stay back in your country, and there is no way that you can fail in life if you still have your hands, and if you still have your brains, and if you still have your legs. I think it is better to invest more. If you can't, if you don't have the necessary education, you can still go back to the soil and till the soil, work in the farms, and you would still have a way of making your life better than going on some of these very risky journeys which you don't know how it will end. I think while crying for government, let's also turn to our civilians and talk to them that there is no need to accumulate wealth, take it, lose it on the road, and then you come back and start life all again.
Absolutely, and I believe that agriculture is something was always advocated for in the course of this program. But then staying with you, Chief MUSI, you earlier on were in the light of the impact this displacement will have on the host countries that are receiving this or harboring these persons that get displaced as a result of numerous factors. Now, in your opinion, what impact, since you already started in that light, what impact does this have on the, say, developmental trajectory of the host country and, of course, the country? Because I remember Dr. Stanley FONGOD mentioned that this has an impact on the human capital, given they have been in camps for a long time and just cannot actually determine for how long they would be as trying to seek asylum in these host countries. So what impact does this have on the developments of the host country and, of course, the country that underwent the said conflict?
I would take a case like when I recently watched the migration, where people are migrating into Italy, and the president of the European Union made a statement that in as much as they can only take a certain number of refugees within a given period of time, they would have to study the documents of all those applying for refugee status, and if you don't qualify, you'll be sent back to your country of origin. Now, this brings me to what parameters are these countries using to have people qualify for refugee status? And you would bear with me that they only have to look at, which is an internal policy, they look at the qualification, they look at your expertise, they look at the different areas of your specialization, they look at what you can offer, what you can offer to their economic growth, what you can offer to their nation as a person. And there are some countries which most of these countries that receive these refugees do not accept nationals from those countries, maybe for political reasons, maybe for dubious reasons where citizens from those countries are considered dubious characters, maybe for, you can even say maybe for issues of culture, Muslims, not being accepted in some countries, or Christians not being accepted in some countries because of their Christian policies or their Christian norms. But I think most of the countries that are receiving these refugees, they do a lot of underground checks to see that if these people are coming in, they have the human energy, they have the power, they have the ability, they have the intellectual capabilities to be able to invest or to add more value to their economy. And I think that is what most of these countries are looking at. Some need skill level, some need mechanical level, some need home level, like people to work in homes. I don't know how they call it in the US. But I think most of these nations, they are looking at what is of their interest and not looking at the interest of the refugee. That's why I keep telling those who are seeking for refuge in different countries that you have to be careful. You need to know what you have. You need to know what you can offer before moving out of your country, because there is no need for you to go to somewhere where you have no skilled level, you have no educational qualification, you have no energy or no human energy to work. Let me use the word, as a slave. If you don't have all of these potentials, what are you going to do? But also, let us also see the downer part that affects your own country. Take, for example, I am a farmer. I'm moving from Cameroon to go to a different country to look for greener pastures. What I know, I'm just a farmer. I have the skill in farming. I'm going to a country where farming is not their thing. So how do you get into that country and measure up? Now you have reduced the economy of your own country by migrating to another land, which you become a nuisance to that land, and you instead degrade the economy of your own country. So I think the economic, there is that economic downfall in most of the countries where these refugees are coming from, because they are losing not only their citizens, they are losing their manpower, they are losing their intellectual, because there are also people, intellectuals moving, lawyers are moving, educationists are moving, especially in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon recently, because of the teachers, the lawyers who started the crisis. So all this class of people are moving away. And these are the better brains that we have in our countries that support the educational sector. These are the better brains that we have that support the legal sector. So at the end of the day, we are draining our own nations, draining our own nation, draining the manpower, draining the economy of our own country to go into another country where we'll be considered as not just third-class citizens, we'll be considered as underdogs. So I think while we are doing this, we need to be very careful on how we want to move and what we can offer to the country where we want to seek a refuge.
Thank you, MUSI Chief MUSI. Now to proceed with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelists in your capacity as an economist. What are the economic implications of this refugee crisis which Africa is facing at the moment?
I think to just add in what Chief was saying, it's important for us to really understand that the bottom of every pyramid is always crowded. So if you're going to think about, life being a pyramid, the bottom is general population. The bottom is where everyone is the default position. You don't have to do anything else in life to be at the bottom. You just have to be yourself and you'll be at the bottom. So the more you go up, as you build human capital, you develop yourself, you become more skilled, you have the capacity to now do things that other people would not do. Then you realize is that as you move from the bottom, as you go up, the amount of people that basically escape the traps that is the bottom gets smaller. And as you keep developing, as you keep increasing at the top of the pyramid, you have very few people who are at the top of the pyramid. That means you've developed yourself to a skill set that you're in great demand. People need you for what you know. People need you for what you can do. And then in that way, you have made yourself more marketable. So once you don't develop yourself, you don't build up yourself, so that you can become marketable in economic terms, then that really becomes a problem when you're looking for work anywhere else in the world. So we have to be able to understand this. I think that we really must be able to tackle the issues, of refugee by providing some kind of financing or maybe some kind of a microfinance entrepreneurship kind of training, to those who are willing to set up and start up small businesses. We have to be able to do this. The fact that you have to take men and women who has been through God knows what and then, create another environment where they have been psychologically, messed up. They have gone through all kinds of trauma and they are finding a way out where they can become who they're supposed to be, who they were born to be, to reduce them, to become foreign aid recipients, that is quite degrading. Why don't we empower them by giving them the capacity to become economically empowered, so that they do not have to depend, on aid? What that does is wherever they are able to exercise their freedom, wherever they're able to exercise their entrepreneurship capacity, wherever they're able to learn a trade, then they become part of an integrated part of that particular community and then influence that community economically, and everybody, the out result or the outcome of that would be that the economy of that place will have to grow. We must be able to find ways in which we actually teach most of those who have been displaced some kind of a skill work rather than trying to ship people out of the continent who absolutely will not be able to offer anything in the countries in which they are going. I think Chief was right. If you are thinking about those who are migrating into Europe, the problem is these countries, they are far more advanced in terms of work, all right? So when you get into some sectors like agriculture, this is well mechanized, and obviously the kind of things you're skilled at working or planting wherever you are is not the same thing that is happening in the Western world. So it's a whole different landscape. Things are quite different. The patterns of the seasons are different. It's not the same like what you have in the tropics. So your skill sets in the tropics basically dies on arrival while you come into the West. So you have to be able to make sure that while you're moving because you have the skill sets that is necessary for you to sustain some kind of a living, out in the West. But better still, why move? What if you had the financing? What if there was some kind of a microfinance structure that had the capacity to be able to give you the money that you need to set up the structures that are important so that you can start up a business? What if there was some kind of a microfinance that was just there, for refugees? What if we had some kind of an entrepreneurship program that was there for just refugees, where we are not just giving them, sewing machines and telling them exactly, go out and start sowing dresses for people, but where we can actually be able to teach them stuff and integrate them, into the fifth industrial revolution economy. What if there was a way in which we're able to teach these people stuff in technology and bring them to a place where everybody has the capacity to be able to be hired while they are on the road, while they're in other countries, they're also working for people in other countries because they're in the tech arena. We need to be able to make sure that we have is human capital. We cannot treat refugees as if to say they are deemed with. We cannot treat refugees as if to say they are morally bankrupt or they're academically bankrupt or do not have the mindset to ascertain anything. We have to be able to make sure that we harness the gift, the potential that these men carries so that they can eventually help each and every one of us to grow on the continent of Africa, because they become the part of the general economy that we have on the continent of Africa. GDP will begin to go up as we have men and women who are able to, bring out different things into the entrepreneurial space and then create jobs for other people as well. We have to tackle these, within these lines. Otherwise, just treating refugees as refugees will be a problem in the long run.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Now to proceed with you, Chief MUSI. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, this is a talking point over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. And of course, to proceed with you, Chief MUSI, now a United Nations ambassador for arts and culture from Burkina Faso, Alif Naba, during a conference had stated that culture, and of course, yes, it's culture, can actually be able, or say could be used to quell insecurity on the African continent. Now, in line with the impact of this insecurity, which we have the refugee crisis, you are a traditional personality, you are a FON, or better still a chief. Now, in your capacity as one of those that uphold culture, not just in Cameroon, but on the African soil, how would you say what role does culture have to play as far as mitigating conflict is concerned?
Well, first, as a FON, what I know is that I am the custodian of a people. And as a custodian of a people, they listen to me, they can take advice from me, they respect certain traditional values that we hold as a people. Because in Africa, you would bear with me, strong institutions start from our traditional beliefs, from what we believe as a people growing up, our culture. And because of that belief, and we as custodians of that culture, we have a direct link with our ancestors, we have a direct link with our people that we govern, so much so that when we communicate, when we talk to them, when we advise them, we talk to them with the powers of ancestors. Now, if you ask how culture can be used to mitigate conflict, it starts from the grassroots. FONGOD talked about the pyramid structure, where everybody is right there at the base. That base we are talking of is our local communities. It's our local communities where our people are, where everyone is the same. Now, when you start moving up to the pyramid, that's when you start narrowing down and cutting and reducing the, people's right to maybe freedom of speech, freedom of belonging, freedom of opinion. Now, if we have to get things mitigated, it means we have to move up to that pyramid. Now, as custodians of our culture, governments need to work directly with the traditionalists, with the chiefs, to be able to understand what the problems are. Because we talked about all of this, and we even forgot some of the things that instigate some of this crisis, some of these conflicts. Take, for example, the farmer-grazer problems that you see mostly the Fulanis are having with the farmers in the villages. You would understand that if we don't have strong cultural institutions where we liaise as different villages within a state or within a country, we liaise as different villages using our traditional hierarchy, using our funds, and then we are failing because government, before, I would tell you, before independence, the power of the people was mostly in the hands of the chiefs of local communities. So I think government should take it back and go back to the grassroots. They are politicizing it and trying to interwoven these powers to mayors, interwoven these powers to councillors, interwoven these powers to elected officials. But one thing still stands unique. The time funds will understand that it is not their place to mingle into politics and govern their people. They will give a better leverage for government to be able to come back to them and ask questions and see how they can govern. And when once little communities start listening to their rulers and taking advice from them without these rulers being part or partisan to politics, and then it will first start curbing down the ideas and the mentality of people where they have beliefs, and then their leaders will give them right directions without fear of favor or fear of belonging to a political party or not. And at the end of the day, we will be mitigating the effects or the consequences of this conflict that is all around Africa, that is all around the world. I would tell you it's not only in Africa, but I know that our African customs and tradition is the same everywhere you go to, even if there are some little differences. You go to Kenya, you go to South Africa, you go to Mozambique, you go to Cameroon, Nigeria, all our cultures are unique to a greater percentage. And I think that if we start bringing our culturalists together, our funds together and talking to them, we will be mitigating this to a higher prospect. And then political leaders, governments should give the rightful place to traditionalists to be able to tell them and govern their people and tell them what their people want. I was also going to add something just before I forget, Sharon, about the issue of our refugees moving to different countries. It is important to also highlight here that it is the right. Let's not also talk without also giving the right to these refugees. It is the right of every human to move to anywhere in the world that he or she likes. It is his human right to move to everywhere in the world that he or she likes and seek a better lifestyle and seek better education and seek to meet family or whatever the situation might be. So it is important for countries where host countries of these refugees to also consider the rights of these people migrating, irrespective of their cultural background, irrespective of their Christian background. I think it is important for us to understand that it is the right of citizens to move for better livelihood or to move away from conflicts or to run to better safety. So they have to. It is their right to seek refuge and for these host countries to grant them refuge based on their claims. I just wanted to highlight this before I forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief MUSI, as in your capacity as a traditional authority, for elucidating on that very point. Before we proceed with the conversation, I'll be coming back to you, Dr. FONGOD. Let's welcome this contribution from Dr. Ahuna, who was speaking in capacity of how the continent, or better still the region, can maximize what it has for its own sustainable development. Take a listen. We shall be right back.
I think this is what our Sahel offer is all about, the regeneration, which is a UNDP programmatic offer for the Sahel, where we're looking at 3 pillars. Governance, and again, governance here, we're not just talking about political governance, we're talking about economic governance, we're talking about local governance. The Sahel is a vast region, and part of the problem is that we apply, again, the traditional lens of political governance on it. We have many areas where you don't even have the presence of government as we know it, but we have traditional systems in place, and trying to understand how to leverage those traditional institutions and systems for governing is something that we are trying to get a grip on and understand and bring in Sahelian intellectuals to inform the way we relate to those institutions and the way we leverage them. So there is the third pillar we're looking at also is youth. As everyone has underlined, this is an untapped asset, and we want to make sure that investment in youth, whether it's youth in relation to creation of jobs, entrepreneurship, startups, technology, digital, or youth in relation to climate change and the role that they play in the transitions, energy. We talk about renewable energy. This is a well for all things renewable, whether it's sunshine or even water. The groundwater facility or capability of the Sahel is mind-blowing. We haven't even touched it. So really, for our offer, it's about regeneration and how we can bring the best of the Sahel to serve the Sahel, the Sahelians. We haven't even talked about natural resources and natural resource governance. It is a region with a lot of minerals that the world needs to be able to get to net zero, the critical minerals. And when will these minerals start working for the well-being of the Sahelians and for human development in that region? So these are questions that we're putting on the table. We have a UN-wide plan as well under our UN integrated strategy for the Sahel, UNIS, which is led by our special coordinator. And within that, we have 6 pillars of work where we're also addressing some of the very deep-rooted issues that need to be tackled, from food security to education. There are so many kids out of school in the Sahel. We have our agencies, UNICEF, UNESCO, and others, who are pulling together strategies on how we can reach kids out of school within the context of insecurity. So a lot happening to be able to use this platform to tell all of it, but a lot more needing to be done.
That was Dr. Ahuna on behalf of the United Nations Development Program. Of course, it's in line with what our guests have been saying since the start of today's edition of the program on Africa's refugee crisis. Of course, Dr. FONGOD, now in a bid to overcoming the global neglect amidst the current refugee crisis which Africa is facing, you listened to that except, but then away from that, what is the role? You mentioned earlier that Africa has untapped resources and it needs to capitalize on these for its own benefit. But aside all that, what role can the youth and, of course, the various stakeholders, we have highlighted the need or the role of traditional authorities, but what can the youth and other stakeholders do in order to counter this refugee crisis which Africa is facing so that we can be able to better handle it henceforth?
Well, I think that, without empowering young people to understand their capacities, especially in terms of being able to be involved in entrepreneurship, it would be quite difficult for us to talk about how we handle these, issues of displaced people. The problem is that most of it is caused by war, except that we're getting young people who will be quite more useful in the political arena by making sure that they elect those into power, themselves into power, and elect people who will care more about their children, that they will care more about their enemies. Men who will love their children more than they hate their enemies. If that was going to be the case, then we'll soon realize that a lot of the civil wars that we have and the conflicts that we have across the continent will cease. I think we need to be able to find a ways in which young men, young women should participate in the political arena in that regard. And also get young men and young women to be involved in entrepreneurship. I'm not a fan of the United Nations. I'm not a fan of bureaucrats. I'm not a fan of people who talk above their heads, people who absolutely have no two functioning brain cells as to what is actually happening in the ground. They are like medical doctors. They are told what to do. Here's a medication, it treats this, and then go ahead and do it. And so you become so used to what someone is telling you without actually questioning, but wait a minute, what is the side effect of this particular? So why am I giving this to this patient? What is that about this patient that they're reacting to this drug this way and not that way? There has to be some kind of a think tank, right, that actually sits down and look at the issues that, you know, we face on the continent of Africa and find out what is it that the African needs. You can be talking about the issues that you want to basically teach young people entrepreneurship, and your model for teaching young people entrepreneurship is to tell them what will be the products that they bring to the marketplace. Let the market decide what is it that the market wants. In the free market, environment, you cannot influence the market environment by deciding what kind of products must come into the marketplace. The market decides what kind of products that she wants to buy. That is what the free market environment is. And so if you're going to teach people about entrepreneurship, keep your cultural and social ideas that you have, or your social experiments that you have to yourself, and allow the market to do what the market does best. The market will buy and the market will promote what the market wants. That is how you get young people into the entrepreneurship space. That is how that functions. Number two, I actually do believe, I think Chief was saying about the fact that, we need to be able to allow people. Yes, that's fine. I believe that people should be able to move across the continent of Africa. And the reason for that is because our cultures on the continent of Africa is exactly what it is. But I don't believe for 1 second, like the Agenda 2030 by the United Nations, that basically states that a time 2030, United Nations wants everybody in the world to just move everywhere else. The problem with that ideology is the fact that then we lose our culture, then we lose exactly what we believe, because that the caveat for that is they'll tell us exactly what to do, what to believe, how to accept what is it that we don't want to accept, how to believe what is it that we don't have to believe. Our cultures on the African continent is not inferior to any other culture. We are who we are as Africans, and there is no way we should be able to allow anybody else to tell us exactly how we need to get things done. Lastly, the Sahel. If you're going to look at the Sahel region, and just upon the report that we had, and all that the United Nations wants to do in the Sahel, the United Nations has been trying to do that for God knows how long. That has not worked. All of these think tanks, people come in to spending money, trying to figure out what is happening in the Sahel, what's not happening. You don't have to do that. The people who live in the Sahel has been in the Sahel for eons of years. They have been in the Sahel with their generations for thousands of years. These are men, these are nomads. These are people with the caravan moving through the Sahara. These are men who have basically watched the Sahara encroach on the land. They know exactly what is going on. They understand how to do this. Why not listen to them? We don't need some guy coming from Washington, D.C. or New York to tell us exactly what is happening in the Sahel. It's some kind of an elitist idea where you think that just because you're coming from somewhere, you know better than the locals. No, let the African who is in Africa tell us exactly what she needs or what he needs. These are the people we need to listen to.
Absolutely. The Africans are the best place to tell the African story. And I would like to stay with you just in a few words, Dr. FONGOD. Do you believe that a proper situation analysis could be able to serve as a situation?
Absolutely. I think that it can, but then one thing is for sure, as long as we keep electing the same dimwits that we have today who are running our countries, as long as we keep electing the same people who basically will cartel to whatever is coming from out of the continent, creating the conflicts that we need, because foreign corporations, like the case in the DRC, needs to come in and collect all that they can collect, loot all that they can loot, the continent will remain where it is. But once young people rises up and says, you know what, the status quo is no longer acceptable, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that we basically take matters into our own hands and stop the looting and stop this fighting and stop those who are basically promoting this war, then I'm sure we will emerge a better Africa. The world will always have refugees, but the truth of the matter is Africa can do better, and I believe that Africa will probably lead the way.
Africa can do better, and that leads me to you, Chief MUSI. Now you listen to your co-panelists in a bit to crown up today's edition of the program, today's conversation. Your co-panelist said Africa is the best place to tell the African story, and he said that Africans can actually do better than what they're doing as of now. So, in your own opinion, in a bit to wrap up today's conversation, what is the way forward?
Well, let's look at, you asked Dr. Fongod how we can assess the situation. I think if we do a swap analysis of what Africa has or what Africa is, you would see that the strength we have as Africans is that we remain Africans. Africa is our land. We were born in Africa, we will die in Africa, and whatever raw material we have in Africa is our raw material. So we have the resources. The weaknesses is that our leaders, our political leaders, are not making things better or best for us Africans, but Africa still remains Africa. Political leaders come and go, but Africa remains. The opportunity we have is that no one will ever change us from being the Africans we are. We will always remain Africans. Even if we come to your country or to your continent several times and we are sent back, we will always remain Africa. And even if we come to your country and settle in your country and have a dual nationality, or we change our nationality, the blood that runs in us is still African blood. The threats we have is that irrespective of what our leaders are doing, we are seeing a vibrant youth a population that is growing within Africa who are more determined to leave the errors of the past, of our leaders, to correct those errors of the past and make Africa a better place. Africa where we will not use the arms supplied to us by the West to turn it against a brother or a sister and ignite that gun to kill your own brother or your own sister, but we will use the knowledge that we have gotten from the training from the West about how to use those guns. We will use that knowledge in terms of conflict management to not use the gun to shut down the voice of a minority, but we will use the intelligence of revamping the minds of our people, where we have seen leaders in Africa, military leaders taking over power in Africa and not using the gun, but using the knowledge of peace and stability to emerge, to make Africa emerge. So I would say Africa remains our fatherland.
Africa remains our fatherland, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you immensely, Chief MUSI, for taking our time to be part of today's edition of the program.
You're welcome.
I call say thank you, Dr. Fongod, for always taking our time to be part of Talking Point.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thanks, Chief, too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I do appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be concluding today's conversation on Africa's refugee crisis, and that is the end of the road for us for this day, of course, on the program Talking Point. Meanwhile, as guests this day, we have Dr. Fongod, a Pan-Africanist and an economist, and Chief MUSI will join us all the way here from Cameroon. Thank you immensely for your keen attention, ladies and gentlemen, and hope by God's grace we shall meet you next time. We say stay in company of programs on 4U Media Africa. Bye-bye.